What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and today I'm going to be going over something a little bit different than my usual, playing, strategy type stuff, and something that was like kind of a big deal that happened yesterday. Mage Market came out with a new way of essentially paying for or buying Magic the Gathering cards, and they have a play now, pay later um, service that they now offer when buying cards, which is basically a monthly financing for Magic cards with Klarna, or however you say that, which basically lets you take out a loan for Magic cards and then pay over a certain term, or I believe you get to set the uh, time, like how many payments that you want to make until you pay off the cards that you bought. And it's not just for buying complete decks; it's just buying singles, buying anything from like singles that you want to buying like an EDH deck or something like that. You can find the cards that you want and then have the service pay for the cards, and then you pay them over a certain amount of time. Basically, how like every loan works, like when you take one out for a car or a house or like for school and things like that. Well, it seems like on the front of it, it seems like a really good idea, right? Like you get to pay for the deck that you want to play. Like you decide that you want to play Tron in Modern, or you want to pick up the Lotus Breach deck in Pioneer, and you just decide like, okay, like I want these cards. Like I don't have all the money like right now, but I have a new job that I'm working or something like that. You basically take out a loan to buy these cards and then slowly pay it back over time. Well, that sounds like a good idea to a lot of people, especially Twitter, because it's big and like everybody usually finds something to complain about like on Twitter. It became a hailstorm of people just saying like you shouldn't take out loans to buy Magic cards because there's more important things to take out loans for and things like that. And while they're not entirely wrong, I do think that this is kind of a shock reaction to something that we've never really seen before. I mean, like we've seen people probably like loan out cards in a way where it's like you basically promise to pay somebody back for like the cards that you're buying off of them. And it's important to distinguish too that like the cards that you're financing you own, you're not renting them. While there's some services out there that you rent cards for a certain amount of money a month, this lets you own them, and then eventually you just pay them off, and then like you don't owe the creditor any more money. So basically, the big thing of this was like when you hear loan, obviously there's a an interest rate that you have to pay, and people allege, I don't know how true this is, but there's a lot of people saying that the service that Mage Market is using, Klarna, however the heck you say that, man, it's so weird, uh, are known to like shark people when they have loans, like just really high interest rates. Obviously, like if it's you pay $200 for a bunch of cards, or go through this play now pay later system where it's $200, like they pay the $200, but then you end up paying like $300-400 as an example. I don't know if it's like that steep, but like basically paying like a ridiculously high percentage, especially if you try to get into like modern or legacy, where you could possibly be taking out like a 4-digit loan, or high three low 4-digit like loan to play these formats and things like that. And so I think that it's important to kind of go over obviously some pros and cons of doing this, and in making like this list, like a lot of it is like the pros and cons if you would take out a loan for like a car or for like a house or really anything else. So basically like when you're taking out a loan, you want to think like, is there like, can I feasibly like pay this back? Like could I like afford this sort of thing? And people brought up on Twitter like the very obvious, like, well, what happens if you lose your job? What happens if you get hurt? What happens? What happens? What happens? What happens? Basically, when something really bad happens, what are you gonna do then? And it kind of brings up like the same situations, like, well, if I went and bought a car, and the same thing happened to me, people wouldn't tell me that I shouldn't buy a car. And while magic cards are definitely different, or it's a hobby versus like a necessity of having a car depending on where you live or going to school or whatever, the weird thing is that like still these things have some sort of value. Like I would almost go on record saying that a school loan, I guess I am going on record, but like getting a school loan and then dropping out and versus like spending like the same amount of money to buy like magic cards that you're specking on or something like that, um, is definitely a lot different than or very two different things. So like obviously like the schooling, if you just drop out and you don't get anything from it, like that $5,000, like you still have to pay back and you have nothing to show for it. Where like at least in the terms of like investing in magic and things like that, like these things like retain some sort of value, whether it's 1 cent or $500. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't take out a school loan or take out a loan to go to school? No. Does that mean that you should definitely take out a loan to buy magic cards? No. I'm just saying that there's some sort of risk that when you decide to assume that risk, there's definitely some reward to if you use that money to good use, and there's definitely a risk that you take that you could just lose all of it. And so basically, the best advice that I can give in front of like all of this like controversy of them doing this, a few key things. Like one, I think that this is like a progressive kind of movement for like card shops and card retailers is just like insane that you get to move product, you get paid, and essentially someone else like assumes the risk of potentially not getting paid. But obviously like they could make more money if it goes to term and whatever, things like that. But like for the card shops themselves, like this is a pretty good way of like protecting themselves and still being able to sell product instead of selling it bit by bit and making their money over the course of like 2 or 3 months or 6 months. Like they just get it all up front and someone else assumes the risk, which is a lot of like what business ends up being, is that like when you have this inventory, like it's worth something, but like obviously it being worth something is different than having the actual like cash in hand. So when it comes down to this, it's I think a very progressive and ultimately could be a very good thing if it ever gets adopted by like other places, other businesses for them to make money, because that's part of the reason why businesses are open. Like they support communities and things like that, but then they're also there for profit, especially like smaller businesses and stuff, just to kind of like grow, and it's something that people love to do. And when you got someone that loves what they do, then obviously you get a better product, I think, and then you get better support and things like that from people that like what they're doing, and especially if you can financially support them so they can keep doing something like that, then that's a good thing. Secondly, if you're not a very financially stable person, like if you're someone that goes from job to job or just loses jobs or like doesn't have basically doesn't have like their life together and things like that, then obviously this wouldn't be a good idea. But then there's also those same people that do the same thing when they get a car or when they apply for a house loan and things like that. There is some people out there that are not financially responsible, and this would be one of those things where I would avoid it if you're not, because going into debt to buy magic cards for whatever reason, whether it's to play in tournaments, whether it's to speculate, things like that, it's probably not a good idea. But on the reverse of that, just because there are people that aren't financially responsible and don't understand the risks that you take when you take out a loan, doesn't mean that the option shouldn't just be available at all. And obviously, there's some pretty bad things out there that would like cause people, like obviously there's like no good that can come out of things, and sometimes there's no bad that can come out of things. But like this is definitely a situation where like I think it's just a knee-jerk reaction to something that like people know that obviously when you owe money to somebody or something and you're not able to pay it back, that something bad happens. And while it doesn't necessarily mean that something bad always happens, in the case of like taking out a loan through like a bank or in this case a different company, that there's a chance that like you could get hosed. And that's just the risk of life in general when you take out a loan anywhere. Is just like if you can't pay it back, then obviously you lose things until the value of the loan is paid back, or you eventually just go bankrupt. um, And when you have like a line of credit or you take out a loan or whatever, like it's something that like helps your credit score and stuff like that. Like there is definitely some positives that come out of it, not just for yourself, but in general, where essentially if someone that's financially responsible, I think, goes to this service and they're able to pay back the loan in a very short term, then you're not paying much more. And then it's like, well, why don't you just pay for it all up front? Well, some people just can't. And this is one of those things where people can, like, if you make half pay half of whatever you owe. Like you pay $300, you pay 150 of it now, and then like 2-3 weeks later, after you get paid or tax return or whatever, you pay the other 150 and it's paid off. Or you pay like the 160, 170, maybe with a little bit of interest that like accrued, if any, and then like it's paid off, and like you paid 10-20 bucks to get all the cards that you want now, and you got them essentially 3 weeks. They're able to play the deck 3 to 4 weeks earlier than what you would have if you would have had to have waited. So, while I think that overall, like, I'm not going to say this is like the greatest thing to ever happen and it's perfect and there's no flaws in it whatsoever, I do think that this is a very interesting step, and I would actually like to see some other companies like try this and see if there's like a way to better the system. Usually, when you're the first to something, it's bad to be the first to something, and it's bad to be the last to something, and definitely somebody has to do it first and try to work on the system. And I think I applaud Mage Market's boldness in just saying like, hey, like we're gonna try something new. This is what we're gonna do. And I think while the backlash was a little bit more harsh than what I think it should have been, there's also definitely the reason to be skeptical and have criticism of a system that like we haven't seen before and that hasn't really been perfected. Maybe there's a better creditor to go through. Maybe there's a better website to go through and do it. I don't have those answers specifically. I just know, coming from the standpoint of just like understanding that like if you can't afford something, you probably shouldn't do it. But then again, there's people that start businesses that take out loans and like they technically can't afford it, but like they're just banking on like this business sort of thing. And while they're all just different scenarios, they're different things. Compared to just buying Magic cards and either trying to resell them or take decks to like tournaments and try to win money back that way to then pay off those cards and things like that. Just overall in general, there's a ton of risk that you take when taking out a loan. And if anything, the important thing to do is to evaluate your financial situation. If you can afford to do it, that's great. Go ahead and do it because it can only benefit you. But if you find out that you can't, but you're going to anyway, I would advise against it because obviously going into debt over Magic cards is not really worth it. Going into debt over anything isn't really worth it, especially if you have no ability to reliably pay it back. And that's kind of my thoughts on the whole Fiasco situation that kind of took over Twitter yesterday, and some even stuff that's like trying to take over today, which is a pretty big thing. But that's gonna do it for this video. That's my thoughts and opinions on this. If you guys want to see more videos like this, let me know in the comments. Leave a like on the video. Consider subscribing to my channel. I do a lot of more like deck techs and more like gameplay Magic like type stuff. I try to do some videos like this, maybe two, 3 videos every like few weeks or something like that, to try to like fill out the rest of the schedule. Some important things to talk about and just kind of like get an idea and opinion from like everybody and try to get from as many angles as possible rather than just like keeping to one single track, which is I think important and a lot to take good advice in life and just in things in general. So yeah, that's gonna do it for me. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, like the little change of pace, and I'll see you on the next one.